Welcome to In the Trenches, where entrepreneurs, artists, writers, designers, inventors, warriors, and leaders share their stories of doing the hard, creative work that impacts all of our lives. Let the journey inspire you to do something worthwhile, build something bold, and create your life's work. And now, your host, Tom Morkis.
Welcome back, everyone, to another broadcast of In the Trenches. I'm really excited to have on the call today Scott Bales, who is the author of Mobile Ready and the soon-to-be-released Innovation Wars, which, when this goes live, will be actually being crowdfunded, crowd-published on Publishizer.com. And we're going to get into a little bit about why Scott is using that to get his book out there into the world, a little bit about the publishing model that he's pursuing, which is pretty exciting if you're interested in self-publishing or publishing in general. And we'll also dig into the book itself, what Innovation Wars actually means. How do we drive innovation in companies and corporations, and even as individuals, even as startup founders or freelancers, how we can drive innovation. I think there's a thread that runs through all of that, and that the most successful companies are people and companies that innovate. So, Scott, thank you so much for being on the call with us today.
Thanks, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Totally. So, okay, I do want to dig into the Publishizer and the crowd publishing aspect of the book, but I want to save that till after the first part. I want you to give us some background on yourself and Innovation Wars itself, the book.
Yes, it's an interesting story. It's one of what I call the reformed banker come entrepreneur. I grew up as a professional banker in Australia, and a random chance to be thrown into Southeast Asia turned me into an entrepreneur. Predominantly in the financial services sector, that's where I've thrived, but in also other sectors. Since 2008, I've successfully driven the creation of a number of startups on all 4 continents around the planet, with basically the headlines being I've helped create 3 companies exceed $100 million valuations, basically through a methodology of what I call structured innovation. It wasn't called innovation back then. It was a hybrid of like design thinking / lean startup. To essentially, how do we build meaningful products that actually scale? The book that I'm writing right now, Innovation Wars, is basically pulling together, 8 years of work all around the world in a framework that is easy to pick up and digest and start executing on very, 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 very quickly. In my day job today is actually as a corporate advisor and consultant on innovation, working with everything from startups up through to multinationals. And so the book is meant to be a way of scaling the knowledge that I want to impart on others on how they can build better products and better services.
I love it. So take me through that concept of how do we actually, people, to some degree, innovation is one of those kind of buzzwords. It's like disruption or something like that. I think innovation is more appropriate than disruption, but and I think there's a huge amount of value in being innovative. But talk me through how we actually become, how does a company implement innovation? How does it actually innovate?
Yeah, and it's a really good question, Tom, because the answer does not lie in the corporate world. And this is the struggle that most multinationals actually, really, really cannot grasp. And the answer actually comes from how the Facebooks, the Instagrams, the Ubers, the Airbnbs of the world, how they built their product. That's where the answer actually comes from. The huge difference between 2 generations of companies is if you look at most of the Fortune 500 today, they built their product in the industrialized area. They built a product and imposed it on a market through a series of either promotions or marketing or advertising campaigns. Most of them have been very successful and been around for some time. Particularly in my area of specialty, financial services, most companies have been around for 100+ years. But what they're seeing is in other sectors, if you look at transportation with Uber, for instance, is the guys that start these businesses, so I'm talking about Travis at Uber in particular, organically and engagingly work with the market's desires and needs to build a product that is more fitting of their actual aspirations, particularly at a higher level. And so the example I always give here, and this is where I challenge the banks, is nobody on the planet buys a mortgage. Literally nobody. Now, yes, the mortgage is one of the most profitable products in a bank, but it's a part of a higher value chain. And that value chain is the process of buying a house. And so the great innovators and disruptors of our time are realizing that there is to own a successful business is all you have to do is serve a greater portion of that value chain. So Uber, for instance, instead of saying, okay, with Uber, we require you to go to a point to actually hail a taxi, to get to where you want to go, to pay cash, actually hope that they take credit card to get to your endpoint, is Uber realized very, very early that the value chain that a taxi operates in is actually getting from point A to point B. And point A might be your office, it could be your apartment, it could be a cafe or a restaurant you're in. And they know that, say for instance, let's take New York as an example. If you're on
consumer standpoint, I love them and I wish they were in my area. They're unfortunately not right now, but it's one of those things or Amazon and Amazon Prime. It's brilliant. You when it works, it works. But I guess how do you methodically go about implementing this type of innovation? And I know you mentioned it's not necessarily found at the corporate level per se. So I'm just curious, how do we actually approach it to say, okay, I have my company, maybe I'm doing well, maybe we're doing great, but we have our business model, et cetera, et cetera. How do you approach, doing something that is by its nature unpredictable? You don't know what you're going to get when you attempt to drive innovation. So how do you approach that? And I guess what's an appropriate way is there a framework or something we can do to actually approach that question?
And Tom, I am super happy that is your third question, because what I say to everyone, ideas are cheap. The idea that Uber started on is extremely easy. The idea that Instagram started on is extremely easy. Even Facebook, for example, the idea is easy. What makes the difference is the execution. And this is equally applicable for both startups and for corporates that are trying to innovate. What it comes down to is exactly what you said. There needs to be a framework or a model in which you can follow to test the validity of an idea and know simple questions like, if this idea is not flying, at what point in time should I discard it or change it? If I know this idea is flying, at what point in time should I invest more capital and scale it? And so over the last sort of 8 years, or the best part of a decade, the methodologies have gotten stronger and stronger. Eric Ries has done really good work in the areas of lean startup. The design agencies have done a really good job of championing the idea of design thinking. We've seen the technology world really championing methodologies like Agile. And the venture capital guys really champion the idea of cash and return on cash models for actually exploring options. And so if you fuse all of those together, we actually have a very strong methodology of what I call the innovation pipeline. And the innovation pipeline is basically around how do you create for your organization a number of strategic options through an ideation process. That could be 2 ideas or it could be 2,000 ideas. But the methodology allows you to systematically go through those ideas and actually evaluate which ones do we have to throw in the trash can and which ones do we want to invest more time and money in. And that's it's a process that requires a degree of let's say creativity, but it's also a process that requires the rigor of a methodology behind it to know that, okay, we believe this idea over here is worth $10,000, but this idea over here is worth $10 million. Hence, we're going to back that one. And that's a tough discussion at almost every corporate. Today they look to traditional consulting houses, particularly the big consulting houses, and they get it wrong all the time. So how do we basically leverage the methodologies of basically Silicon Valley to build the future of any industry? And I said I spent a lot of time in healthcare, in insurance, in financial services, in retail, in pharmaceutical. The methodology pretty much stands up every single time in challenging that industry to think about what's next.
Awesome. I love it. Okay. So we have this framework. We have a way to approach it. And I think most people, understand the idea of innovation and why it's so important. So now I want to talk a little bit about, I guess my question is this: is this something that anybody can apply, or is it mostly geared towards larger companies? Is there a certain budget that's required? And if it's not relegated to larger companies or larger corporations, how does a smaller business find an innovative edge, or even a startup, as an example? Again, like Uber was a startup. I guess it still maybe technically is. It's pretty huge, but the point is, how does something small, something that maybe lacks the amount of funding as like an established company or corporation that doesn't have that budget, that can't say, okay, well, let's put X number of millions into this right from the get-go. Is there something that smaller organizations can do and apply this the same way?
Yeah, so there's some really simple frameworks that will come out in the book, which I talk about the ideation process. And literally, it's a structured process for coming up with ideas for strategic options. One of the things that challenges almost every industry today is they are so good at doing what they do already that they forget about almost blue sky thinking or adjacent industries or challenging the way things are in their industry. A lot of my work is actually working with incumbents in almost every sector, of basically coaching them to re-ask the core questions of why is it like that? Just because you say that's the rules and it's always been like that, that's not good enough. We need to dig deeper. We need to figure out why is it like that? Is that still the best possible way to do that particular thing? And so what's actually required here is a structured way of challenging the status quo. Because if you don't do it, whether it's a small business or a large business, somebody else is already doing it. This is what everyone right up and down the valley are doing, is literally challenging the incumbent way of thinking of every industry on the planet. Education, healthcare, financial services, insurance, social, retail, e-commerce, distribution, logistics, like everything is being questioned as, is there a better way to do this industry? To revisit the core paradigms of that industry and to challenge them.
Okay, awesome. I love it. All right, so now I want to shift a little bit. Well, it's not a switch, it's a shift a little bit to innovation in publishing, and kind of ties the story together and actually explains. The book itself, that's what's so appropriate, I think, about how you're attempting to leverage Publishizer. And so take me through this. Why go the route you're going? I think you're the type of person with a certain platform that you could probably get an agent, could probably get a traditional publisher right away, going through those like traditional means. Yet you're attempting to use Publishizer in a very unique way. So take me through that a little bit. Talk through that.
Yeah, I think to answer this question, Tom, I have to refer to two books because Mobile Ready and Innovation Wars will go through two very different journeys. Someone like myself has a skill set that allows them to be entrepreneurial, and that allows someone like myself to have, let's say, a bias towards controlling certain decisions within the process of producing something. So I am quite comfortable with ideation. I'm very comfortable with marketing. I'm very confident with distribution. I'm very confident with consumer outreach. I'm very good at building demand. So all those things, these are things that normally an author would get from a publisher. So you'd go for a large publishing house because they know how to get your book sold to 10,000 people. But as a result, because of buying into that know-how, they'd also then basically own the book, because they would then say, okay, we're going to produce it our way because we have our own recipe for success. And so going through the process of Mobile Ready, I quickly realized that, look, I understand why publishers do it the way they do it. It's the same way that a venture capitalist does investment in their own way as well. But I wanted more control. So I actually chose to partner with Guy at Publishizer to basically test a new model in publishing, and that I would crowdfund the capital that a publisher would normally basically advance to an author to produce the book. So in traditional publishing, an author might get an advance of X amount of dollars that would fund, funding research, concept design for the cover. It might fund, a publicist, for instance. So the components that would actually take up to bring a book to market. When I work with Mobile Ready, I was quite lucky in that I already had a background in marketing. I had a background in community engagement and sales. So I was actually able to raise nearly $35,000. So I had the money to produce the book myself. I didn't need the advance of a publisher. So I chose and paid my own editor. I chose and paid my own publicist. I chose and paid my own production company. I chose and paid for my own distribution systems. And as a result, did quite well. I mean, the book was, at the time, the third highest crowdfunding book on the planet. And when I actually put books into the Amazon warehouse, it made itself up to fourth in the consumer behavior book, the consumer behavior segment, which is not bad for a first-time author, independent as well. I then realized through that process there was a couple of things that I liked and didn't like about the process. I loved owning the production process, particularly for someone like myself with an entrepreneurial kind of lean. I knew the components that I liked owning and deciding on, but I hated distribution. I would have gone back and begged somebody to take over the distribution of the book. Mm-hmm. And so with the next book, I've decided that I'm going to try and do a hybrid. I'm not doing a full-scale publishing deal. I'm not going to do a full-scale self-published deal. So I haven't got a name for it just yet. And Guy and I keep chatting about this. It's kind of like almost what I want to call it crowdfunded bridge publishing. And let me explain what that means. It basically means that I will crowdfund the money that it requires to produce the book and bring it to market. So when it gets to the publisher, it's a book that is ready to go. It's sold X number of copies. It's already well known. It's ready to go into market. There is a bunch of collateral ready to support its ongoing sales. All they have to do, but even to the point where the manuscript has been, so I'm partnering with the same editor again, the manuscript will be basically almost production ready. So all the things that would cost a publisher to produce a book, that risk has been taken off the table for them. So the hope is basically that they'll then be able to pick up a book that already has, let's say, 1,000 copies sold. Mm-hmm. All they have to do is distribute it, which is, if you're a publisher, particularly an agent or a publisher, that's a pretty good deal to know that, okay, I'm going to pick up this book, there's 1,000 copies already sold, and the author already has a way to market the book. And that's what I'm trying to test, is basically saying, can I crowdfund the production, but work with a traditional publisher for distribution?
Perfect. Okay, I love this. So I've gone through the Publishizer process myself. I did it back in 2014 and 2014, I think it was. And at the time, I used it like any kind of traditional self-publishing or crowdfunding platform. I probably could have gone with Kickstarter or something like that, but I wanted to go with Publishizer primarily because he's a good dude, and I think he's hyper focused on. And I mean, the platform itself is all about books, so there was that. There were a lot of other benefits to the platform, in my opinion, too. But I think it was his, focus on publishing, on building something for writers and self-publishers, and just his focal point being writers and self-publishers, that I think made the platform more appealing to me as somebody who's crowdfunding versus, say, using something like Kickstarter. Now, in this last few months, really in this past year, I know he's been working on this shift to this kind of new paradigm in publishing, where, for lack of a better way, the way I kind of understand it or perceive it is almost kind of becoming the agent to some degree in the process, in the value chain. So the traditional process, for those who aren't aware, if you want to get traditionally published, you need an agent. So you have to put your manuscript out or your proposal out to usually it's a proposal, not a full manuscript, but you'll give your proposal out to different agents. You usually have to make calls and request referrals or introductions. That's usually like the best and fastest way to actually get an agent is finding somebody who can get you a contact. So you have to hustle that. Then the agent has to work to get your book in front of a publisher. And so basically there's like multiple steps and middlemen. And so Publishizer now with this new angle is kind of basically removing that agent process where if we can sell X number of books, there's going to be a number of publishers who are very interested in that asset, that entity, that book that you're publishing through that platform, or rather not publishing, but at least pre-selling. So that's kind of the new angle for those who are interested. So that wasn't around when I first did Publishizer, but that's kind of the angle it's taken, which I'm very excited about. So talk me a little bit through this, Scott, in terms of how you want to leverage this platform in this way, and why you think, what about it makes it appealing to you?
Yes, so let me try and fill in some of the holes in your story.
Sure.
So full disclosure, I've been an advisor to Guy ever since my last book. I was the one that pushed Guy to kind of break the boundaries of traditional publishing with Mobile Ready. Mobile Ready, I think even to date, is still Publishizer's most successful book. And so what we actually did is Guy and I actually had a very fortunate opportunity probably about 18 months ago to actually meet with Random House, with Wiley, with O'Reilly, with Marshall Cavendish. So a lot of big names in the publishing space, and to basically hear what are they struggling with. And unanimously they said something that really resonated with Guy and I, and that was they see thousands of proposals every single month. I mean, literally thousands. The challenge they have is they know, where in the time they have, they know that 10% of books will actually work. And that's the 10% of books that actually make it to market. They'll also know that there's probably 50% of books that will never work. So literally 1 in 2 proposals get rejected. But there's also this area in between, which is basically the 40%ers, which they call sort of the grey zone, where they're kind of like, well, that's interesting. It's either a first of its kind, or it's a new topic, or it's a new genre. They just don't know, basically. And what they would love to have is a way of saying, what could I test to test the validity, or particularly the commercial validity of this particular book, to remove the commercial risk? Because anytime a traditional publisher agrees to take a book to market, they will be investing time and money to bring that book to market, and we're not talking small dollars. My estimate from where I stand is I don't see them investing any less than $25,000 per book they bring to market, and that's everything from paying the editor, the publicist, the cover designer, the printing of the first run, getting into the various stores and so forth. It's expensive. So if you think about this, if you're a venture capitalist that's investing in ventures, with a fairly unknown, that's a bit of a challenge. And so what we realized is there was an opportunity here. If we could take that 40% and help validate the commercial viability of those books, we would go a long, long way to actually reducing the risk of these kind of grey area books for the publishers. And so, Guy hasn't found an author yet to actually test that. I just happen to be the stupid or the brave, I'm not sure which one is yet, that's bold enough to go and actually test that model. So if I can go out there and basically raise $50,000 off the back of this book that produces the book, it has, say, 1,000 copies pre-sold, that actually significantly reduces the risk for a publisher to then take on the book as a book within their portfolio, and that's what we're trying to test here. Is really showing that there is an opportunity for potentially more books to come to market. So if this model works, you're probably going to see tens of thousands more authors around the world get a chance to actually test the commercial validity of their books.
Okay, so I love this. And again, I think it's great that you have that insider perspective then, again, as an advisor to Guy and Publishizer, and having had the chance to have these conversations with traditional publishers, I think is excellent. So my question is this. What's the biggest, like looking at it from like a devil's advocate perspective, what's the biggest downside to this model for a traditional publisher? I think, and I'll put my thoughts out there real quick. I would think that probably the biggest, and again, the biggest challenge for a Publishizer itself, and for your book when it comes out, is the fact that publishers have a process. They have their own funnels. They have their own system. And it's like, if it's not broke, don't fix it kind of thing. Although I think most people probably agree that publishing is pretty broken. And the nature of kind of what you explained in terms of total cost that it takes to get a book to market makes it like a really challenging marketplace. So what is the biggest – I'm curious, what is, from the perspective of the publisher, what's the biggest challenge with adopting a new angle like this, or a new approach to publishing using something like Publishizer?
And so I think you've hit the nail on the head in your question there. And this is not specific to publishing. This is the exact same challenge for any industry. The big challenge for them is getting their mind around changing the way they've always done things. I would say 90% of people who work in publishing, they just accept the way they do things today is the way they always are and always will be. And so the publishers that will survive, particularly, I would say, to the end of the decade, are the ones that are nimble enough to now realize that there is new methods, there is new ways of doing things. Authors actually have significantly more power to actually validate the potential of their book without their help. And so if a publisher wants to remain valid, this is a good way of saying, okay, how can I work with an author that's already de-risked their book and then help bring them to market? How can I still then be their publisher? The challenge for them is, and they'll know this very, very obviously, is that for most agents and for publishers, they get significantly better royalties off a book, commissions even off a book, if they own the initial investment. So let's say, for instance, if a publisher gives you $30,000 advance to produce your book, that is a $30,000 investment in your book, at like a seed investment in a startup, and as a result, that comes at a cost. It basically means that because they're the ones that are funding the capital, the commissions that are paid to an author are usually under 20%. Where if the author is the one that's actually raised the capital and tested the book, the risk significantly almost flips. And so you're probably going to see right now the big challenge for publishers is considering the possibility of, would they still do a book deal if we had a book that's pre-sold 2,000 copies, the author has basically already funded the production process, so all of the upfront costs are gone. All they have to do is distribute it, but the percentages of commission are reversed. So would the author now gets 70% and the publisher gets 30%? Would they still do the same deal? I don't know. That's what we're trying to test here. That's what we're trying to test right now. Is basically, now I'm not saying that these are percentages that we're targeting for, but what we're literally saying is that, okay, instead of depending on the publisher to provide that seed capital for a book and to take the risk, what if I take the risk myself? What if I take the risk by pre-selling the book? It basically changes immediately the risk model in the commercial validity of any book.
Mm. So my question on that is, though, like, is there any downside to actually getting pre-orders for a book on the publisher side? I would think not, because again, depending on however the contract works out on the back end, they kind of reap the rewards of the press that's already developed. You've mitigated the downside risk. You've validated that people care about the idea at least, and they're willing to put their money where their mouth is. Is there any downside to the publisher to do this in terms of like, because the one thing I look at it and I perceive, it seems like I perceive, is that it seems to some degree that publishers might be like, oh well, if you've already pre-ordered, you've already done the pre-orders, you've already done this kind of campaign. Well, maybe that lessens what they think they could do with the book had they just gone through their traditional channels. Do you find any kind of challenge there on the publisher side?
I mean, the challenge is literally just the mind shift in themselves. Right. Can they accept a new way of doing things? And this is not specific to publishing. This is a challenge of innovation in almost every sector. I've seen the exact same mental challenge in the insurance sector, in the banking sector, in retail. I mean, you have a look in Australia right now. You have retailers lobbying government to charge different forms of sales tax, so they can attempt to recapture some of the market they've lost to e-commerce. We see taxi drivers protesting in the street in Paris and London because they're like, how can Uber change our industry overnight? The reality is change is coming in every sector. That's an unstoppable force.
Yeah.
The ones that are not only surviving but thriving are those that realize that if you pounce on this change earlier, you basically get first mover advantage. You can actually end up working with a movement and become a powerhouse. I mean, I often laugh at this. It's a question I ask my clients a lot. Is what do you think are the three highest growth days in Uber's history? And most of them were like, oh, it was this, it was that, blah, blah, blah. And I go, no, actually, you know what it was? It was the day that Paris taxi drivers burnt tires on the freeway. Because basically what they did is they shut down public transportation for the country. People were forced to use Uber. The Paris taxi drivers forced nearly 800% growth for Uber users in Paris on one day. And so the people that actually resist change are the ones that will end up enabling change for those that have been early adopters. The same happened in London. The same happened in New York when was it Mayor Bloomberg ruled against Uber in yellow cabs. I mean, it's basically a trend. So those that resist the change will significantly lose out and inadvertently actually encourage the adoption of change.
Yeah.
So if I was a publisher today, I would be saying, how do I invest heavily in being ahead of the curve? Like, how do I? And this is almost a self-fulfilling prophecy for myself and for Guy.
Right.
But how do I make this model work? And how do I start now seeing lower risk books with a higher return?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it boils down to for a publisher. They have lower risk books that are already pre-sold. I mean, any publisher on the world would scream for that kind of success. And so the ones the publishers that we see right now that are interested in that kind of model are the ones that are probably going to be the ones that own publishing in the next 5 years.
Gosh, I love this. I'm super excited about this book. I guess full disclosure too, maybe I should have said this at the beginning. So I'm helping out with Innovation Wars for those who are listening, running kind of the marketing and promotion and outreach piece of it. And I'm very excited about this project because it's something, while I've done crowdfunding campaigns for books before, never with this angle, never with this goal, never with this focus. And I think it will be disruptive. I'm super excited. So our goal, and this is what I'm very excited about, is how do we run this campaign and pre-sell enough copies to get a publisher interested and basically get somebody to take over the distribution and fulfillment for Scott's book, Innovation Wars. And it's a fun challenge, man. I think it's going to be exciting. Any other, thoughts or anything else to add to that in terms of people who are listening? Because this will go live when the campaign's live. So any other thoughts for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly that. So, one of the good things that the book journey has actually created for myself, and this will come out when the book actually comes out. All the people that I've interviewed in this book are the people that are naturally attracted to or already enabling innovation in their sector. So they're just as enthusiastic as you are. I mean, you're enthusiastic for seeing innovation in the publishing space, but my insurance clients are just as enthusiastic for seeing innovation in insurance. It's almost like I don't want to blow my own horn, but quite regularly I work with clients that end up transforming an industry. If you look at my CV, and you'll see that I worked with I worked with Wing Money in Cambodia. That was my start of my entrepreneurial career. Wing Money today processes 37% of the country's GDP. Because they were just that innovative. They created an ecosystem that not even the banks could compete with. We then repeated that in Bangladesh, working with BRAC Bank. We're at a client, again, an innovation client, and we built them a mobile payment subsidiary called Bcash. 3 days before we recorded this interview, Bill Gates was talking about how Bcash will be the biggest financial services company on the planet, surpassing the success of mobile money in Africa. And it's just by basically following the principles that are outlined in the book of saying, okay, how do you find someone who has the courage to challenge the status quo and follow a process into creating a future? And so I find, this is a buzz that I get every time I work with a client. I love working with clients that's like, I know my industry is broken. Help me fix it. They are the best clients on the planet to work with.
I love this. Awesome, Scott. Well, I'm super excited. Obviously biased, but I try to remain unbiased in my biasness. But no, the reality is super pumped about the book. I think the idea is, infinitely fascinating to me. I'm a big fan of startups and the concept of innovation and what drives that, and how do we actually really find that competitive edge? Because it's not just copying and replicating what everybody else is doing, but in any industry you have to, as a matter of survival. Innovation is a part of that. So I'm excited about the book. I'm especially excited about the publishing angle on this and how we'll flip the publishing model on its head a little bit here with this kind of great experiment, and pumped to be a part of it with you. So Scott, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches and sharing your story. And I will say this to anybody who's listening, go to Publishizer.com, and I'm sure you'll find Innovation Wars at the top of the page somewhere there. So check out Publishizer.com and look for Innovation Wars by Scott Bales. Pick up a copy, help us break the publishing paradigm, the old school way of thinking, and help us kind of usher in a new way of new innovations in publishing. So Scott, thank you so much for being on In the Trenches, man.
No worries, Tom. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's always a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you for listening to In the Trenches. Your creative work doesn't stop here. Join the Resistance, the small but growing army of entrepreneurs and artists putting a dent in the world at www.tommorkis.com. Never fight alone. Join the Resistance.